I walked a trail of tears today. I could not know that pain. I saw my greatest fear displayed, shook my head in shame. I wondered how the world could break the circle of despair. That's when I looked into my heart, found my answer there. I'll start with my heart. That's where the future is.
When you can see the descendants of slave masters, when you can see the descendants of slaves joining their hands and their hearts together, it is enough to give us hope.
If we in this state, in this city, can find a way to heal some of the hurts that go back in our history, we'll have something to share with people all over the world, in South Asia, in Bosnia, Herzegovina, in South Africa, in Central America, other places where history is a heavy burden.
Richmond, the capital of Virginia, a state which has produced 8 American presidents. Richmond, a city proud of its history as one of the first European settlements in the New World and capital of the Confederacy at the time of the American Civil War. But a city, too, where modern concrete and selective memories have all but buried the shameful landmarks of slavery and the devastating detail of what happened to the original inhabitants. Could an honest conversation about the past by all races together lead to a healing that could affect not only Richmond but the whole country? This question compelled Richmonders from the west to the east ends of the city and neighboring counties, led by Mayor Walter T. Kenney, to host Healing the Heart of America, an honest conversation on race, reconciliation, and responsibility. Mayor Kenney addressed the more than 700 people from Richmond, from 30 cities across North America, and from 20 other countries at the opening banquet.
Race and ethnic differences are at the core of most of the hatred, anger, and violence that peppers our globe. Our world, this nation, and this city must come together and address the greatest vehicle of separation that people have ever experienced, the fear and hatred that comes from racial differences.
Richmond, he said, had made significant progress since the Civil War. It was now the home of the first elected African-American governor in the nation. But there was unfinished business. The work of healing the community could only go forward through a look back at its history. In the east end of Richmond sits Church Hill, once known as Indian Hill, one of many Indian settlements flourishing at the time European settlers arrived in 1607. Beginning here, Richmonders joined with others to explore that history through the Richmond Unity Walk.
We felt that this city had something that it had to face as a city. Perhaps that because racism had started in its worst form in America here on this ground, that this was the place that the beginning of the end should take place. We felt that taking our own history seriously and showing that we as black and white and Native American Richmonders could walk through it together and honor the dead of all races, honor the pain that all suffered. We felt that if we could do this, we might be able to begin the process of healing.
The walk began with Native American dance and a prayer by a Dakota elder to lift the veil of ignorance from our eyes and see we are all brothers and sisters. Chamber music symbolized the arrival and domination of the Europeans on the Native American lands, and a griot, a traditional African-American storyteller, led walkers through this unfolding drama of Richmond's history.
They tell me that you got folk from all over the world here today. For that we give thanks. They tell me that these people have come with open hearts, open minds to cure or begin the cure of one of the worst ills that's facing the world today.
Along the route, history was brought to life. On Church Hill stands St. John's Church. Here, Virginian leader Patrick Henry gave a fiery speech in 1775 that helped ignite the American Revolution.
Is peace so dear and life so sweet as to be purchased at the cost of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course other men may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death!
But as the walkers were reminded, liberty in Virginia in 1775 was not for everyone.
My friend, Mrs. Lottie Jackson Langford just jumped in that well. My friend, Mrs. Lottie Jackson Langford birthed 22 children on this earth, and they sold them all. And last week she had 2 twin boys. And she took those boys in her arms, and she jumped in the well. Because she didn't want her children sold into slavery.
Before the walk, Joseph Montville and Rutledge Dennis underlined the significance of trying to heal history and the risk involved in doing so.
Is that the persistence of unhealed historic wounds develops a psychology of victimhood. Victimhood comes from having suffered terrible wounds in the past, terrible losses of life, property, land, political identity, of loss of a sense of confidence in the future for ourselves and for our children.
In a society organized around race, in a society based on exclusion and discrimination, it takes a great deal of risk-taking to move beyond the borders. It takes risk-taking on the part of all individuals and all groups, not just one. Because we get accustomed to being in our comfortable racial worlds. We get accustomed to dealing only with the people we know, with the ideas we know, with the values we know. And we don't want to risk rebuff. I think to solve the racial problem, to move towards racial healing does require being made uncomfortable. Sometimes being made very uncomfortable.
Well, the reason that I wanted to come on this walk is because it deals with healing. And being a native of Richmond, I know that there's a great deal of healing that needs to take place in the city of Richmond.
As walkers got to know one another along the route, they were handed carnations remembering those men and women who died on board slave ships.
I come today to claim my roots, to open my heart, to affirm my deeds, to say that Richmond is home to me. We gathered here today right now in Libby Park, served as a natural setting and a natural protection for the Indians that were already here. But it also brought the Africans here. It was here at Manchester Dock that the Africans landed and were brought on into Richmond. We want the fact that you are holding one of these flowers to represent and act as an affirmation that you will take responsibility.
Once the flowers were collected, they were cast in prayer on the James River at the Manchester docks. This was a principal port of entry for Africans brought to the United States between 1680 and 1780. A stone wall along the bank is the sole reminder of the pain and indignity of the commerce of the slave trade. Now the souls of slaves who had never even seen the river banks had been laid to rest. The spreading of the flowers in the river brought a healing for both black and white. On the hill above stands a statue honoring Confederate soldiers who died.
When I saw the monument, I saw pain. The pain that I've suffered as a black person, as a black man, the pain that my ancestors had experienced. And that's when I realized that I needed to be healed also, because that pain caused me not to want to look at the situation. It taught me that I had not come as far as I thought I had come in my reconciliation with the problem of race in my life. And then I began to look at it from a different perspective, and that was the perspective of grief, because the ancestors of the Confederate built that monument out of grief, and they need to be healed as well.
Down from Church Hill, the walkers followed the route taken by Abraham Lincoln amid the smoldering ruins of Richmond the day after the city surrendered at the end of the Civil War, just 10 days before Lincoln himself was assassinated. The walkers continued past the old Henrico County courthouse where slaves were sold, and past the first Jewish cemetery in the area, and on towards the city's business district. The urban crisis of today is deeply rooted in American history. Race is not responsible for all the problems cities face, but it is a driving force behind most of them.
Cities that are in deep trouble are in trouble because of severe racial and economic segregation. Some of the poorest cities in America sit at the heart of some of the wealthiest metropolitan areas.
Whenever the matter or the subject of race relations comes up, inevitably the matter comes down to economic development. Sooner or later, that expression enters into the discussion and the conversation. And that means the discussion centers around jobs. And especially it relates to all of the cities in the country, especially the inner city. So jobs really becomes the issue. And economic development is the solution. Now that sounds pretty easy, but the fact is that before you can come to a solution relating to jobs and economic development, you just have to go through a process of dialogue. And until we go through the process, the solution isn't there. It simply isn't there. And we have learned that the hard way in Richmond.
The more we learn, the more I'm convinced that it's just inescapable that racial perceptions and racial attitudes affect the very markets that are the foundation of the economy of our cities. And unless we sit down, all of us together, and roll up our sleeves in workshops and forums and task forces and figure out what it's going to do to turn the situation around, I see a very, very bleak economic future for our communities.
At the site of Lumpkin's Jail, a slave auction block known as the Devil's Half Acre and the original site of Virginia Union University, walkers heard a story drawn from Richmond's business community of the 1860s.
Yes, ma'am, they put you on that block, and who's never wanted you bid for you. The highest figure in the bidding got you. Ain't you done seen auction sales of property like that? You see slaves chained. Sometimes the slaves be in pens like cattle.
Today, highways built upon the homes of freed slaves make it possible to travel through this proud multiracial city without giving a thought to the suffering that is the heritage of half of its population.
I came on the walk because I think you get a better perspective for Richmond if you're on the ground. So driving over on the interstate here is okay, but getting down here on the ground and seeing it firsthand I think is more important. So you get a feel of it, get a feel of the people who are here. You know, all colors, many continents.
One of those McHale got to know was Wayman Baker, a former Los Angeles gang member.
I think that what's happening today should go down in history. Now, if the heart is changed within a human being because of what's happening here, if the heart is changed to a positive viewpoint on what's happening here today, then yeah, sure, we'll make